This story of the people of Limhi is significant in so many ways. In some ways, their story echoes the Exodus story that we have in the Bible, where God saves his people from Egyptian bondage and brings them out into the wilderness, makes covenants with them, and then leads them into the promised land. And so you might take that as an opportunity to study and compare and contrast how are the people of Limhi similar and different to the people in the time of the ancient Israelites in Egypt. And of course, the major difference there is, I'll just give you a few hints. The people of Limhi got themselves into bondage because they weren't keeping the commandments. The ancient Israelites were actually just living in Egypt because God had brought them there to save them from a famine, and then eventually the Egyptians just took them over. But there's something significant here that we should point out. I have a phrase written up here on the board. It's the phrase, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. If you look back in verse 19, listen to how Limhi teaches his people. He says, "Lift up your heads and rejoice, and put your trust in God, in that God who is the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob." Now, listen how he goes on. He's actually trying to drive home to the people, you can trust God to deliver you. Why? Well, let's remember, what did we learn in scriptures? This is the same God who brought the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt and caused that they should walk through the Red Sea on dry ground and fed them with manna that they may not perish in the wilderness, and many more things he did do for them. Limhi wants to remind the people that they are in covenant with a God who himself is covenanted to deliver them. And that actually is tied into the Abrahamic covenant. We've talked about the covenant path before. There's two major covenants. The Abrahamic covenant, where God obligates himself to his people to provide them posterity, property, priesthood, and prosperity. And in return, the Mosaic covenant explains our obligations to God, which is to keep the commandments. The Abrahamic covenant is being invoked by this phrase, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And of course, what is the people's duty? If they keep the commandments, they shall prosper in the land. And it turns out, under King Noah, the people had not kept the commandments. That is why Abinadi was sent to the people as a Moses figure to teach them the 10 commandments, the things that they should be living so they could prosper in the land. That's the Mosaic covenant. And now Limhi is basically saying, you guys can trust God. And if you guys keep the commandments, God will deliver you. And we see this beautiful deliverance story that happens here in the book of Mosiah. In fact, it's another similar story is repeated later on that we'll talk about with the people of Alma who also go into bondage. And eventually, the same thing. God invokes the Abrahamic covenant. He's the God you can trust. He's a God who is covenanted with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to provide blessings to their children and posterity, which are the people we find in the Book of Mormon. And all of us, either by blood or by adoption, are the children of Abraham. And so we have full access to all that God has offered. He simply asks us to keep the commandments. And every week at sacrament, when you partake of the sacrament, you're making the promise to do these very things. And as you do, the promise back from God is you will receive the Spirit to be with you, which is a form of prospering.